There is a $1.3 trillion hole sitting underneath the American retirement system right now. Not in the stock market, not in crypto, not in some obscure corner of Wall Street that only affects hedge fund managers. In the pension funds that were promised to teachers, firefighters, police officers, and municipal workers across the country. People who spent 25 or 30 years doing exactly what they were told. Show up, do the job, and when it's over, we'll take care of you. Except the math has never actually added up, and the people running these funds have known that for decades. And what makes this story different from every other financial disaster story you've heard is this. The 2008 financial crisis had a clear moment, a visible collapse, banks failing on live television. This one doesn't work like that. This one is slow. It's quiet. It's happening in budget meetings and actuarial reports that nobody reads. And by the time most people realize what's coming, the hole will be too deep to climb out of. So today, we're going to follow the money. We're going to look at how pension funds actually work, why the math was always broken, which cities and states are already failing, and most importantly, who actually pays when these promises can't be kept. Because here's the part that should make you uncomfortable, even if you've never worked a government job in your life. The answer to that last question is probably you. To understand how we got here, you first have to understand what a pension actually is, because most people under 40 have never had one and probably never will. A pension is what's called a defined benefit plan. The name says exactly what it is. Your employer defines the benefit you will receive in retirement. You work for a certain number of years, you contribute a percentage of your paycheck, and when you retire, you get a guaranteed monthly check for the rest of your life. The number is locked in. It doesn't matter what the stock market does, it doesn't matter what inflation does, the check shows up every month until you die. Compare that to what most private sector workers have today, which is a defined contribution plan. That's your 401k. Your employer defines what goes in, not what comes out. What comes out depends entirely on how your investments perform, how long you work, how disciplined you are, and frankly, how lucky you are with the timing of your retirement relative to the market cycle. For most of the 20th century, the pension was the gold standard. It was the deal that made public sector work attractive, even when the salaries weren't. You traded a higher private sector paycheck for job security and a guaranteed retirement. And for decades, that trade made sense for both sides. Then the private sector started doing the math. Because a defined benefit plan isn't just an HR policy, it's a financial obligation that sits on a balance sheet and compounds over time. And as workforces aged, as life expectancy increased, and as those guaranteed monthly checks started lasting 20 and 25 and 30 years into retirement, companies started to realize they had made promises that were significantly more expensive than they had originally modeled. So the private sector quietly exited the pension business. In 1983, about 62% of private sector workers with a retirement plan had a pension. By 2022, that number had collapsed to around 15%. The private sector handed workers a 401k, called it empowerment, and moved on. But the public sector never made that switch, and that's where the problem lives today. Because roughly 21 million active public sector workers and around 11 million retirees are still owed defined benefits. And the funds that are supposed to pay those benefits are, in many cases, dramatically short of what they need. Here's where the math gets uncomfortable. Every pension fund makes an assumption. It's called the assumed rate of return. Basically, the fund says we are going to invest the money we collect from workers and employers today, and we assume that money is going to grow at X% per year. And based on that assumption, we calculate how much we need to have in the fund today to cover all the benefits we've promised for the future. The problem is that for most of the last 2 decades, public pension funds in the United States have been assuming returns of around 7 to 7.5% per year. That number is not conservative. In the decade following the 2008 financial crisis, with interest rates pinned near zero, Generating 7% annually required pension funds to take on significantly more risk than a fund with long-term guaranteed obligations probably should. But here's the thing about assumed rates of return. If you lower the assumption, the math gets worse immediately. Because a lower expected return means you need more money in the fund today to cover the same future obligations. And more money in the fund today means larger contributions from governments. And larger contributions from governments means higher taxes or cuts to other services. And nobody in an elected office wants to be the person who delivers that news.
So the assumption stayed optimistic, and the hole got deeper. According to the Pew Charitable Trusts, which tracks public pension funds across all 50 states, the gap between what public pension funds have and what they've promised to pay out has grown to over $1.3 trillion, using the fund's own optimistic assumptions. If you adjust those assumptions to more conservative, market rate returns, some analysts put the real number closer to $4 to $5 trillion. Let that settle for a second. A $4 to $5 trillion shortfall in the retirement funds of teachers and firefighters. And the funding ratio, which is just the percentage of promised benefits that are actually covered by assets, tells the same story. The average funding ratio across all state pension funds in the US is around 72%, which sounds okay until you realize that means the average pension fund is only 72 cents funded for every dollar it has promised to pay out, and several major funds are far below that average. Kentucky's pension system for non-teachers sits at around 27% funded. New Jersey's pension system is around 37% funded. Illinois, which has the largest unfunded pension liability of any state in the country at over $200 billion, hovers around 44% funded. And Chicago's municipal pension funds have funding ratios in some cases below 25%.
These aren't projections. These are the numbers the funds are reporting themselves, using their own optimistic assumptions. But this isn't just a spreadsheet problem, because these numbers have already translated into real consequences for real people. The most documented example of what pension failure actually looks like on the ground is Detroit. In 2013, Detroit became the largest municipal bankruptcy in American history, and pensions were at the center of it. The city had accumulated over $18 billion in debt, a significant portion of which was unfunded pension obligations. And when the bankruptcy was settled, retired city workers saw their pension checks cut. People who had spent careers as city employees, who had planned their entire retirement around a specific monthly number, opened their mail one day and found out that number was smaller now. Not by a little, by enough to matter. Then there's Central Falls, Rhode Island, a city of about 19,000 people that went bankrupt in 2011 and cut pension benefits for retired police and firefighters by up to 55%, more than half. People who had been told their entire working lives that the check was guaranteed.
And these aren't isolated historical footnotes. Puerto Rico's pension system essentially collapsed as part of its debt crisis, leaving government retirees with cents on the dollar. And right now, Illinois continues to spiral. The state is constitutionally prohibited from cutting pension benefits, which means every dollar that goes to pension obligations is a dollar that doesn't go to schools, roads, or public services. The pension payment is now the largest single line item in the Illinois state budget, larger than education, larger than healthcare. Chicago's situation is arguably worse. The city faces over $35 billion in pension liabilities across its various funds. Property taxes have been raised repeatedly to cover pension contributions, and the city's bond rating has been downgraded multiple times, making it more expensive to borrow for anything else. The pension is eating the city alive, and Chicago is not alone. Now, here's how a pension fund actually collapses, because this is the part that doesn't make the news until it's too late.
When a pension fund is underfunded, it faces a specific and self-reinforcing problem. It needs to generate higher returns to close the gap. And to generate higher returns, it has to take on more risk. And taking on more risk means the fund is now more exposed to the exact kind of market downturn that would make the problem worse.
This is the pension fund death spiral. and you can track how it happened in the data. In 2001, the average public pension fund held about 60% of its assets in public equities and bonds. By 2022, that allocation to traditional assets had dropped significantly as funds poured money into alternative investments. Private equity, hedge funds, real estate, infrastructure, anything that projected higher returns on paper. And this chase for yield created a second problem that almost nobody talks about: liquidity mismatch. A pension fund has a very predictable obligation. Every month, it needs to write checks to its retirees. Those checks don't stop when the market has a bad year. They don't pause when the fund's private equity holdings can't be sold because there are no buyers. The checks go out regardless. But private equity investments can be locked up for 7 to 10 years. You can't sell them in a crisis. You can't use them to make payroll for retirees when the public market portion of the portfolio has just dropped 20%. When that mismatch hits in the middle of a down market, the fund is forced to sell its liquid assets, usually public equities, at exactly the wrong time, which locks in losses, which makes the funding ratio worse, which creates pressure to chase even higher returns, which means even more risk. The spiral tightens. And the people sitting in the middle of this spiral aren't hedge fund managers. They're retired teachers in Illinois and retired bus drivers in New Jersey who have no ability to change the situation, no ability to go back to work at 71, and no alternative income stream. They were told the math was handled. It wasn't. So when a pension fund fails, who actually absorbs the loss?
There's a federal agency called the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, or the PBGC. It was created by Congress in 1974 specifically to serve as a backstop for failed private sector pension plans. If a company goes bankrupt and can't pay its pension obligations, the PBGC steps in and covers the benefits, up to a certain limit. That limit for 2024 is around $81,000 per year for a retiree who starts collecting at 65, which sounds like a lot until you realize that many long-tenured workers at large companies were promised significantly more than that, and anything above the PBGC ceiling simply disappears. But here's the detail that changes the entire picture. The PBGC covers private sector pensions. It does not cover public sector pensions. State and local government pensions are explicitly excluded from PBGC protection, which means if the Illinois pension system fails, or if Chicago's municipal funds run dry, there is no federal backstop waiting to catch the retirees.
What there is instead is the political and legal process of bankruptcy, which, as Detroit demonstrated, can result in benefit cuts even when state constitutions technically prohibit them. Courts have repeatedly found ways to make the math work at the expense of the people the system was designed to protect. And the PBGC itself is not exactly a picture of financial health. Its multi-employer program, which covers union pension plans across multiple employers in industries like trucking and construction, has been carrying a deficit of its own. The American Rescue Plan of 2021 injected $86 billion into the multi-employer PBGC program to prevent its insolvency, which just means Congress used taxpayer money to patch one hole in the system, while the larger public sector hole remains entirely unaddressed. So the federal backstop has a hole in it, and the public sector has no backstop at all. And this is where the story stops being about retirees and starts being about everyone else. Because when a city or state pension fund runs short, there are really only 3 ways to close the gap: raise contributions, which means higher taxes, cut benefits, which means broken promises, or cut services, which means fewer teachers, slower emergency response times, worse infrastructure, and reduced public investment in the exact communities that need it most. Usually, it's some combination of all 3. And the people who bear that cost are not the fund managers who set the return assumptions too high. They are not the politicians who underfunded the plans for decades to avoid tax increases. They are the residents, the active workers, and the retirees who had no seat at the table when any of these decisions were made. Illinois has raised income taxes twice in the last 15 years, partly to cover pension obligations. New Jersey has been chronically underfunding its pension system for so long that catching up now requires contributions that crowd out nearly every other budget priority. And dozens of smaller cities across the country are quietly making the same impossible calculations, hoping the crisis doesn't fully land on their watch.
This is what makes the pension crisis different from a stock market crash. A stock market crash is visible, it's dramatic, it's on the front page. The pension crisis is actuarial. It unfolds in annual reports and budget projections and court filings. It moves slowly enough that by the time it becomes undeniable, the people responsible for it have long since retired themselves. And the traditional financial media isn't going to cover this, not because they don't know about it, but because a $1.3 trillion funding gap that has been building for 30 years and will take another 20 years to fully manifest doesn't make for a good Chiron. It doesn't trend. It doesn't move markets this week. So it doesn't get covered. But it should, because this is the kind of slow-moving financial failure that reshapes cities, breaks social contracts, and hits hardest on the people who were most promised protection.
The pension was supposed to be the safe version of retirement, the guaranteed version, the version where you didn't have to worry about what the market did on any given Tuesday. And for millions of Americans, it still is, right up until the moment it isn't. And unlike a stock market crash, there's no V-shaped recovery coming for a pension that can't pay its obligations. There's just the math, and the math has been wrong for a very long time. So if you want to understand the financial risks that actually matter, the ones that are already happening but haven't made the front page yet, hit subscribe, because the loudest risks in markets are almost always already priced in. It's the quiet ones you need to watch.